Go now, before you forget, to that corner by the fence where that same green bush with yellow flowers and orange sap in its stem grows every year. Look at it closely. This is greater celandine, the very same one you pulled out last year, the day before yesterday, and for the last 20 years. You pulled it out with your bare hands, threw it into the wheelbarrow, and took it to the compost or straight to the trash because it's a weed, because it's ugly, because it grows where it shouldn't. And then, that very same week, you grabbed your purse, drove to the garden center, and bought two bottles. One for the aphids that swarmed your cucumbers, the other for the blight that started turning your tomato leaves black. You paid 100, 150, sometimes 200 zlotys. You came back, sprayed, waited, and every year it's the same story. Do you feel it? You were pulling out for free the very plant that contains exactly the same substances you were buying in a bottle. Every year for your entire gardening life. Do not throw away greater celandine. I will repeat this once more because it is the most important sentence you will hear today. Do not throw away the celandine from under the fence. Do not pull it from the bed by the compost bin. Do not treat it like an enemy, because it is your greatest ally in the garden, and you are killing it with your own hands. In that yellowish-orange drop of sap that oozes out when you break the stem, there is an entire chemical factory, stronger than half the things sitting on the shelves at the agro market. Do you hear what I'm saying? And now, the most important part. It is not your fault. It really isn't. You did exactly what you were taught. Your mother pulled it out. Your grandmother pulled it out. Your neighbor still pulls it out today. Every gardening guide said it was an invasive weed and you had to get rid of it. No one told you otherwise because no one makes money off that knowledge. This is not a conspiracy. This is not a cover-up. This is just basic commercial logic. A pesticide manufacturer is not going to spend 1,000,000 zlotys advertising a little plant that grows on its own for free. They will spend it on a bottle with a label that they will sell to you. That's how it works. Think about it for a moment. The gardening manual you learned from didn't lie either. It was simply written by people who collaborate with chemical companies, not by a grandmother from Mazovia who has been making celandine infusion for 40 years and has the cleanest tomatoes in the neighborhood. The grandmother from Mazovia doesn't write manuals. The grandmother from Mazovia simply gathers the herb in June and does her thing. Meanwhile, you sat there with a bottle, reading instructions written by someone who wants to sell you that bottle again next year. Do you know the feeling? And now I will tell you exactly what you will learn today, because I won't keep you in suspense. First, you will discover the real mechanism by which celandine kills aphids and blocks potato blight. The same blight that killed 1,000,000 people in Ireland in 1845 and is now devouring your tomatoes. Second, you will get the exact recipe for the infusion, tested, working, the kind used by Polish female gardeners before the war. Third, I will show you the one mistake that 9 out of 10 women make with this recipe. A mistake that sends all your hard work straight to the trash and renders the infusion worthless. And finally, fourth, you will understand why this knowledge has almost disappeared from Polish gardens over the last 50 years. Think about it. Do you remember your grandmother's or grandfather's garden? There probably weren't any bottles of chemicals there. There was a bowl, a piece of soap, and a bucket of green leaves and water. Tomatoes grew, cucumbers grew, cabbage grew. There were fewer aphids, and if there were any, Grandma went outside, came back with an armful of weeds, and did something nobody told her to read in a manual. She did it because her mother did it. And now you stand in the agro market, reading the ingredients of a product you can't pronounce, and paying 200 bucks. Something got lost between the generations. Today we are going to get it back. Now let's calculate together how much all this has cost you, because until you see the numbers on paper, it won't sink in. Grab a pen if you want. Insecticide for aphids. That standard 100 milliliter bottle you pick up every season costs about 40 zlotys, but you buy it twice a summer because the aphids return in a stronger colony once all the ladybugs and lacewings that kept them in check die off again. That's already 80 zlotys just for aphids. Fungicide for potato blight, the one for tomatoes when the bottom leaves start turning black. That's 3 to 4 treatments a season, each at 20-30 zlotys a bottle, plus the sprayer, plus the gas to drive to the store. You easily throw in 120 zlotys per season here, sometimes more. You add potassium soap, you add adjuvants, you add the foliar fertilizer they sold you to complete the set, and suddenly it comes out to almost 200 zlotus to protect a standard 100 square meter vegetable patch. 200 zlotus a season. Multiply that by 20 years of gardening, and that's 4,000 zlotus thrown away on bottles whose effects wear off after 2 weeks. And now the other side of the page. Celandine by the fence, 0 zlotus. It grows on its own. You don't sow it. You don't water it. You don't weed around it. Gray soap, 100 gram, 2-3 zlotus at the drugstore. Tap water, which you use for watering anyway. A bucket you've had in the shed for 20 years. Total, 5, at most 10 zlotus for the whole season, regardless of how big your garden is. 200 zlotus versus 10 zlotus, 20 times cheaper. And this isn't savings on a one-time thing. This is savings that return every year as long as you have garden beds. And here arises the one question you must ask yourself. If the difference is so obvious, if this plant has grown under every Polish fence since forever, if your grandmother's grandmother knew about it, why didn't anyone tell you? Why do you have to hear it now from a stranger on the internet instead of hearing it from your own mother? The answer exists, and it will hurt a little, because it ties into the story of a specific Polish woman whose name you won't find in any gardening manual, even though you should. But before I get to her, there is one thing you must not skip. If you ignore what I am about to say, if you make the infusion your own way, on your own, without this one crucial rule, you will end up with something that looks like the right infusion, smells like the right infusion, has the color of the right infusion, but in reality is just lukewarm tea with no effect whatsoever. You will spray your tomatoes in the evening, go to sleep satisfied, and in the morning the aphids will still be sitting there, thicker than before. After 3 days, the tomatoes will start yellowing from the bottom because the blight has set in. You will think it's all nonsense, that celandine doesn't work, that people lie on the internet, and you will go back for the 150 zloty bottle. That is why you must read to the very end to find out exactly which mistake is your downfall. And now let me tell you about a certain woman. Her name was Halina Warziniak. In the 1960s, she worked at an experimental station near Krakow, in a small town on the border of Lesser Poland, where research was conducted on natural plant protection methods. She was an agronomist with a degree from the Agricultural University. She was 34 years old when she started her own experiment, one without a director's stamp, without a budget, without anyone's approval. She simply planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and cabbage on her own 150 square meter plot. Think about her for a moment now. Helena noticed that her grandmother from a village near Tarnów never used a sprayer. Her grandmother simply picked the orange weed from under the wooden picket fence, soaked it in hot water, left it for 24 hours, added a handful of soap made from ash and fat, and sprayed. The grandmother's yields were better than the yields at the experimental station where Helena worked. That struck her. She decided to find out why. For 3 seasons, from 1965 to 1967, she kept patient notes. 1 bed with nothing, a 2nd bed, chemical agents recommended by the ministry, a 3rd bed, celandine infusion, according to her grandmother's recipe, applied once a week to the undersides of the leaves in the evening. The result after 3 years was such that Helena didn't sleep for a week. When she saw the numbers, the bed with celandine yielded 28% more tomatoes than the chemical bed, and almost twice as many as the control bed. Potato blight was decimating local farmers in those years. At Helena's, the tomatoes stayed healthy until October. She wrote a report, 32 pages, detailed tables, detailed calculations, detailed photographs. She took it to the station director. The director flipped through it, nodded, said, "Interesting, Ms. Helena," and put it in a drawer. The report went into the station's archives in 1968. Helena was transferred to another department that same year. Someone decided that research on wheat varieties was more important than her weed from under the fence. For 20 years, no one opened that folder. Helena worked in wheat until her retirement. She died in 1994. She never published what she discovered. Leave a heart for Helena Warziniak. She deserves it. And the most interesting part is that this wasn't just a Polish story. At the same time in the 1970s, in the German Democratic Republic, a group of botanists near Dresden conducted similar observations on greater celandine and came to almost identical conclusions. Their work also disappeared into the archives. Nobody read it either. Two countries, two women, the same plant, the same forgotten effect. It's not a conspiracy. It's simply the logic of a world where someone has to pay for knowledge to circulate, and no one will pay for celandine because it cannot be patented. And now I will show you what happens inside this plant that you cannot see with the naked eye. Your garden is not a peaceful picture from a calendar. Your garden is a battlefield where 1,000 little wars are fought every minute, and you are just an observer. An aphid sits on a cucumber, sucks the sap, and multiplies 20 times every 10 days. A potato blight spore flies through the air. It waits for a drop of water to land on a tomato leaf. All of this happens in your garden every day while you drink coffee on the porch. Do you feel it? And now for the most interesting part. When you break a celandine stem and that orange drop oozes out, inside sits a microscopic, chemical, ruthless army. The first substance, which we will tentatively call the aphid poison, enters the insect's body through the leaf the aphid feeds on. It reaches the aphid's nervous system and blocks one specific enzyme, a little molecular switch that normally turns off the signal between the nerve and the muscle. Imagine an electrical outlet that no longer has an off button. The signal just keeps flowing. The aphid's muscle contracts and cannot relax. The aphid suffers a kind of continuous spasm, paralysis, and dies within a few dozen hours. This is exactly the same mechanism used by the newest synthetic organophosphate insecticides, except your chemical bottle costs 40 zlotys and celandine costs 0. The second substance, the antifungal one, works completely differently, and this is even more fascinating. Potato blight is not an ordinary fungus. It is an organism more closely related to marine algae than to a mushroom. Its cells have a thin membrane, like a balloon inflated from the inside. The substance from celandine tears this membrane, piercing it like a needle popping a balloon. The entire contents of the cell leak out. The pressure drops, and the blight organism dies before it can infect your tomato. Do you remember what happened in Ireland in 1845? 1 million people starved to death because no one back then knew how to stop this little monster. That same monster is coming for your tomatoes today, and you have a free weapon by the fence, and you aren't using it. The third thing no one told you: mulch. If you lay chopped celandine biomass around your tomatoes in a layer 5 to 7 cm thick, you are doing two things at once. First, you physically block water drops from splashing spores from the ground up onto the lower tomato leaves. Second, the alkaloids from the celandine slowly seep into the soil and neutralize the spores that are already there. Two fronts of defense at once. And what does this mean for you right now? Now, in the summer with your tomatoes, it means that if you throw down mulch in June, your tomatoes will make it to October without their leaves turning black. And now pay attention, because we are approaching the one moment that made listening to this whole story worthwhile. There is one mistake. 9 out of 10 women make it on their first attempt at this infusion, and it is a mistake that destroys everything. All the work, all the gathering, all the waiting. It looks absolutely logical. It even looks smart. It looks like something any homemaker would do when she wants to do something properly, and yet it destroys the infusion completely. That mistake is boiling water. You pour boiling water straight from the kettle, 100 degrees, over the chopped herb, because if it's hot, it's stronger, because that's how you make tea, because you have to extract everything you can. Logical, right? Mom poured boiling water over dried herbs. Grandma made chamomile that way. Your friend makes lemon balm that way. And here lies the trap, because celandine is not chamomile. The alkaloids, those substances that were supposed to kill the aphids and stop the blight, are sensitive to temperature. Above 60 degrees, they start to break down, and at 100 degrees, after 15 minutes, half of them are gone. After 24 hours of soaking in boiling water, you are left with an infusion that smells, has color, and looks professional, but is empty. It is a chemical corpse. You brewed the celandine to death. That is why the correct temperature is 75 to 80 degrees, meaning water that has been boiled and then taken off the burner for 5 to 7 minutes to cool down a bit, or boiling water poured into a bucket half filled with cold water and then a little more cold water is added to balance it out. Without a thermometer, you can tell by touch. You can stick your finger in for a second. It is very hot, but it doesn't burn immediately. That is the temperature, and that is the entire difference between an infusion that kills aphids in 2 days and an infusion that does nothing, even though it looked professional. 5 days after spraying, you will see the difference. Either the aphids are decimated and the ladybugs are starting to return, or they are sitting thicker than before, and you think it's all nonsense. Tell me in the comments if you used boiling water like this. Tell the truth. State your region: Mazovia, Lesser Poland, Subcarpathia, Pomerania. We'll see if there's a pattern, because I suspect this is the most common mistake in all of Poland, and no one talks about it out loud. And now the protocol. Write it down, print it out, hang it on the fridge, because tomorrow morning you will go out to the garden and start doing it right. 5 steps, not one more. Step 1. Harvesting. You go get the celandine in May or June when the plant is blooming with yellow flowers. That is when the concentration of active substances is highest. Always, and I stress this, always wear thick rubber gloves, because the orange sap stains the skin yellow-brown and causes a burning sensation in sensitive individuals. You cut it with a knife near the ground, stem with leaves and flowers into the bucket. You need 1/3 of a 10-liter bucket, which is roughly 3 to 4 kilograms of fresh herb. Step 2. The infusion. You chop the herb with a knife on a small board into pieces about 2 fingers long. The finer, the better, because the substances will come out more easily. You pour the chopped herb into the bucket, boil water, let it sit for 5 to 7 minutes so it drops to 75 to 80 degrees. Not boiling water, I will repeat this once more. Not boiling water. You fill it to the top, cover it with a lid or a board. You leave it for 24 hours in the shade, preferably in a shed or a basement. Step 3. Preparing the solution. After 24 hours, you strain it through gauze or an old bed sheet into a second bucket. What is left goes to the compost or straight under the tomatoes as mulch. You dilute the liquid in a 1:3 ratio, 1 liter of infusion plus 3 liters of cold water. Into 10 liters of the ready solution, you pour 100 grams of grated gray soap. You stir with a wooden spoon until the soap dissolves. The soap is the glue that will make the infusion stick to the leaf and not wash off after the first rain. Step 4. Spraying. You take a sprayer, preferably a 2-liter shoulder sprayer. You go out in the evening after sunset or in the morning before 7 a.m., never in the middle of the day, because in the sun the drops act as lenses and burn the leaf. You spray from the underside of the leaves because that is where the aphids sit and where the blight spore lands. You repeat every 5 days as long as you see a problem. 3 sprays at weekly intervals, and the aphids stop coming back for the rest of the summer. Step 5. Mulch. After trimming the celandine from the garden, do not throw away the scraps. Spread a layer 5 to 7 centimeters thick around the tomatoes, circling the stem but not touching it directly. Leave a 2-finger gap. The mulch dries out, turns brown, releases substances into the soil, and retains water. Every 2 weeks, you add a fresh layer if the first one has dried halfway. Under this mulch, the potato blight spore has no way to get onto the leaves. A raindrop falls on the weed, not on the soil. And now about what happens next when you do this. Because the synthesis of everything you have heard today fits into 3 simple images that I want you to engrave under your eyelids forever. The first image is that orange drop that oozes from the broken stem and soaks into the cucumber leaf. That drop carries a tiny poison that enters the aphid's nervous system and blocks that one molecular switch between the nerve and the muscle. The aphid suffers a spasm it cannot relax and dies after a few dozen hours on your cucumber leaf. For you, this means that the bottle of chemical insecticide for 40 zlotys becomes unnecessary starting tomorrow. The second image is that same orange substance meeting a potato blight spore on the lower leaf of a tomato. It pierces its thin membrane like a needle popping an inflated balloon, and the cell's contents leak out, killing the spore before it can drive its mycelium into the leaf tissue. For you, this means that the 3 bottles of fungicide at 30 zlotys each that you bought every summer can also be put back on the shelf and forgotten. The third image. It is that thick layer of chopped weeds spread around the tomato stem. Those 5 to 7 centimeters of brown biomass that work on 2 fronts simultaneously. From above, it takes the impact of raindrops and prevents spores from splashing from the soil onto the lower leaves. And from below, it slowly releases alkaloids into the ground, neutralizing the spores that were already waiting there. For you, this means that a bag of pine bark for 50 zalotes and 2 soil treatments also drop off your shopping list. Do the math in your head now. Insecticide, fungicide, store-bought mulch. Foliar fertilizer to complete the set. Altogether almost 200 zlotys a season, sometimes more. On the celandine side, gray soap for 3 zlotys and tap water. This is not a one-time saving. This is a saving that returns to your wallet every year as long as you have garden beds by your house. 30 years of gardening times 200 zlotys is 6,000 zlotys in bottles that dried up after 2 weeks. And remember this one thing that most people will never learn. 9 out of 10 women pour boiling water over celandine and kill their own work before they even step out of the kitchen into the garden. You already know that the temperature is 75 degrees, not 100. This is not general knowledge from the internet, dear neighbor. This is your personal advantage over the whole street. And now imagine 2 gardens on the first Sunday of October. The first garden is the neighbor's garden, who took the old path. The lower tomato leaves are black, the upper ones yellowed. Fruits with brown spots are falling to the ground. The cucumbers have been done for a long time, and her wallet is empty after 3 trips to the agro market. The second garden is your garden, if you do what I told you today. Tomatoes still green on top, red in the middle, lower leaves healthy, cucumbers still bearing fruit. The ladybugs have returned. Lace wings circle between the beds in the evening, and your wallet is the same as it was in May. Which garden do you choose? This is not a rhetorical question. This is a question for you today, right now. Option A is the old path, the one with bottles for 200 zlotys every season and black tomatoes in August. Option B is the celandine from under the fence, 10 zlotys for the whole summer and healthy tomatoes until October. Write one letter, A or B, in the comments and say out loud why. Not for me, for yourself. When you say it out loud, you hear yourself. And then write how many tomato bushes you planted this year and what region you are from, so we can see together where in Poland this knowledge is returning the fastest. Listen to this one last thing. Right now, as I am speaking to you, under your fence stands that green bush with yellow flowers, and in its root, in its stem, in every tiniest vein, flows an orange blood that science cannot replicate in a laboratory for any amount of money. This plant doesn't know it's a weed because no one told it so. It has simply been doing its job for 1,000 years, patiently, without advertising, without a label. Without a price tag, it has been waiting for you under that picket fence for 20 seasons. When you bend down tomorrow morning and cut it with a knife instead of pulling it out and throwing it away, you are doing something more than just making an aphid infusion. You are giving this plant back its true purpose, the one for which it grew in your garden and not 100 meters away. You are returning to the path of your grandmother, your great-grandmother, of that Halina Warziniak from near Krakow, whose folder lay in the archives for 20 years waiting for someone to come back for it. You are returning to the garden that existed before someone sold you your first bottle. Strength is not in a plastic bottle with a trilingual label you cannot read. Strength is not in a receipt from the garden center. Strength is in understanding why an orange drop blocks an Aphids enzyme and an alkaloid tears apart the membrane of potato blight. Knowledge that no one will take away from you as long as you have eyes to see and hands to gather. This is yours forever. Go out tomorrow at dawn, even before your neighbor gets up, and look at that bush differently than you did yesterday. Go deep, everything is there. If this story has changed the way you look at the forgotten gifts of nature in your garden, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a thumbs up. Together we are uncovering history and knowledge that they tried to hide from us. Together we are sowing a better future. We will uncover another of nature's treasures for you very soon.